Sans plus tarder, je vais donner la parole à nos panélistes afin qu'ils se présentent. Monsieur Castonguay.
Merci beaucoup. Premièrement, un gros merci à toi et ton équipe, Jasmine, pour avoir organisé cet événement. On apprécie également la nature originale du concept. Donc, Benoit Castonguay, directeur par intérim de l'équipe Gens et compétences à Innovation, Sciences et Développement économique Canada. C'est, en toute honnêteté, ma première expérience au sein d'une équipe des ressources humaines et j'ai découvert une nouvelle passion pour moi professionnellement. Donc, c'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous. L'équipe de gens et compétences a été mise sur pied il y a environ 2 ans pour essayer d'amalgamer tous les services et les programmes de ressources humaines qui sont orientés à nos employés et pour essayer de capturer un peu l'expérience employée à ISDE. Donc, le mandat de notre équipe touche sur la gestion du talent, la gestion de rendement, l'apprentissage, les programmes de développement, le onboarding, l'intégration au ministère, primes et reconnaissance également. Donc, c'est un peu l'éventail des services qu'on offre à nos employés du ministère. Je suis également le gestionnaire de talent pour le programme d'agents libres du Canada qui est en train de se mettre sur pied à ISDE. Et je suis un agent libre moi-même avec la cohorte au Secretariat du Conseil du Trésor. Donc, un focus particulier pour nous cette année, évidemment, ça a été la gestion du talent, la mobilisation de talent. Je pense que la réponse COVID-19 met l'emphase sur comment identifier les compétences essentielles, comment les mobiliser à des objectifs corporatifs. Donc, c'est un peu cette optique que je vais amener à la conversation d'aujourd'hui. Merci, Jasmine.
Merci, Monsieur Castonguay. Madame Crandall.
Merci, Jasmine. Merci, Benoit. My name is Nathalie Crandall. I'm currently the talent manager of the Free Agents program at Natural Resource Canada. And like Benoit, I'm also a free agent out of Transport Canada Cell. I also have been working on various aspects of talent management or skills and profile mapping for employees with the federal government for some years. So I'm really excited to be here and to talk with you guys about all of this today. Thank you.
Super, merci. Mr. Taylor.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Jasmine and team, for the spectacular event today. And I'm honored to be here. Hopefully this will be one in a stream of many of these fantastic events. My name is Julian Taylor. I am the Director of Workforce and Data Analytics Services at Okro. And we're responsible for reporting on the workforce and various different aspects of the workforce for the core public administration primarily. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to this fun event. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Madame Filiatrault.
Good afternoon. My name is Janie Filiatrault. I'm a director with the Benefits Delivery Modernization Program at Employment and Social Development Canada. Scope of our work is really around delivering high quality and timely and seamless services to Canadians. And I'm responsible for the workforce management work package. So really supporting that future operational state and looking at tools that we can nationally manage our operational staff and aligning with the workload that's coming into the department to support the programs. Also includes the training strategy and how do we upskill and do the career development for the staff working in the service delivery hubs. I may be bringing a little more of an operational lens to the discussion today, but really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Super, merci Filiatrault. Effectivement, ce qu'on cherche à générer, c'est un dialogue à partir d'une variété de perspectives. So without further ado, we will launch into the questions, and I'm going to ask our panelists, maybe I'll start with Madame Filiatrault first, to react to some of the statements or questions that I'm asking. If you, audience, have anything you would like to add to the conversation, raise your hand. Participate via chat, and we also have a Slido as Mr. Arsenault provided the passcode and information to be able to join through there. So we'll be monitoring all of those. So please, if we haven't invited you to this session, maybe it's because we don't know about you and we should. So please raise your hand and let us know if you want to be included in further dialogue. Like Julian mentioned, there might be many more events. What we're trying to do is so vast that we can never cover it in an hour, right? So we'll do the best we can throughout the month to just make sure everyone has the right information, or at least some information. Okay, so let's go back to our skills. I'm going to ask this in English. I'm going to ask you to react. Skills within the public service are adequately measured and can be efficiently matched with jobs. Et je vais mettre la version en français dans le chat. And I'll give each of you a turn. You'll only have a few minutes just so that we can manage our time. Madame Filiatrault.
Thanks. I think when I read that statement, there's definitely room for improvement on how we effectively manage and track the requirements. We tend to fall back probably in our old ways in our staffing approach and evaluating candidates that meet the requirements versus using maybe objective data that we can draw from past work experience, performance, and some of those pieces. So I think there's definitely room for improvement there.
Exceptionally short answer. Mr. Taylor.
You put me in there to get the long answer. I like that. Well, I think the fact that we're here today to talk about this subject suggests that there's probably an opportunity for improvement. And I think, you know, when we look at this, it really comes down to the concept of a gap analysis, which is, you know, you need to understand something about what's on the left, and you need to know something that's on the right, and you have to kind of be able to measure the distance between the two. And so we really don't have any clear data on our jobs and what the requirements are in a collective space. We don't really have a whole lot from our employees in a big space either, and not a whole lot of common measurement. So we're early on in the phases, I think, but I don't say that to be negative, because there's been a lot of really great work that's been done in that space. I think we just need to start looking at it more of a global perspective rather than pockets of great work. And I think if we can find a way, utilizing frameworks that exist already, to kind of pull that great work together, I think we'll actually be in a fairly good state.
What a brief answer, Mr. Taylor. Thank you. Madame Crandall, reaction to that?
I'll riff a little bit off of what Julian said and maybe further expand on what I see as some of the gaps. So first and foremost, I think we are going further in the skills conversations than we have in the past in the government. So I'm really excited about what the future bodes. But as Julian started to mention, some of the major gaps we need to address as we start really looking at how we map skills for employees are a common framework where everyone is talking the same language, and a common way to measure and evaluate those skills. And so I think that there's a lot of work being done in various pockets of the government and, of course, in the private sector in the whole world right now on this front. And there's an element of some of our next steps involve herding a few of the cats into this direction to try and move things forward. I know ESDC actually, and in some of your groups, have actually done some excellent work around some of this skills mapping and some of the things that you have going on. And I know that there's a lot of other work like that going on in government. So I think that's probably one of the biggest gaps we have to address as we start really thinking this through. Thank you.
How? Thank you. Monsieur Castonguay.
Merci. Je pense que comme première étape, c'est important d'essayer de définir les compétences. On parle beaucoup d'essayer de mesurer, de faire le lien, de faire le matching, mais sans la définition commune, on est un peu laissé à un défi d'envergure pour essayer de faire ce travail. D'un côté, les descriptions de travail sont souvent définies comme key activities, donc des activités clés. D'un autre côté, quand on fait notre recrutement, c'est beaucoup axé sur l'expérience. Donc, on trouve qu'on a beaucoup de terminologie, plusieurs différentes définitions qu'on va appliquer, mais la cohérence entre ces différentes terminologies-là et leur lien direct à des compétences ou des skills reste à désirer de mon côté. Je vais juste mentionner rapidement une réalisation que nous avons faite à ESDE, c'est qu'on traite notre talent interne de la même façon qu'on traite notre talent externe. Donc, je vais vous donner un exemple. On lance une compétition souvent ouverte au public. On évalue des milliers de candidatures. On fait des entrevues, etc. Et à la fin de tout cet exercice-là, on s'aperçoit que, dans plusieurs cas, c'est des employés qu'on a déjà à ESDE. Donc, on fait tout ce travail-là, on investit toutes ces ressources-là pour définir et identifier du talent qu'on connaît déjà au sein de l'organisation. Donc, je pense que réassocier ou réorienter certaines de ces ressources-là vers des services de gestion de talent, utiliser la liberté qui nous est qui nous est donné dans certaines de nos lois ou des législations, je pense que ça pourrait nous aider à essayer de mieux aligner les compétences et les besoins.
Merci. Je pense qu'on vient de soulever tout un autre débat par rapport à l'importance d'aller chercher le talent externe versus utiliser ce qu'on a à l'interne. Et je pense que la discussion d'aujourd'hui aussi peut mener à éclairer c'est quoi exactement le problème qu'on a à l'interne, pourquoi est-ce qu'on n'est pas capable d'identifier les talents, les habiletés, les compétences que nos gens ont déjà pour pouvoir les réattribuer de façon plus efficace. Un exemple de ça, c'est pendant la COVID, où le gouvernement a été forcé à rediriger une partie de son effectif pour répondre de façon urgente aux besoins des Canadiens, que ce soit au niveau financier ou que ce soit au niveau de la santé. Donc, on vient de vivre une crise. Je pense qu'il y a une petite leçon à apprendre de là. Est-ce que la fonction publique va l'apprendre? I have a few years until retirement. Time perhaps will tell. And also we will actively try to find solutions. Donc, la prochaine question, c'est dans quelle mesure est-il important de valider, évaluer les compétences plutôt que de demander aux candidats de s'identifier? Quels sont les risques, les obligations et les implications? In English, how important is it to validate and assess skills versus asking candidates to self-identify? What are the risks, obligations, and implications? Je vais y aller avec M. Castonguay.
Parfait, merci. Je vais poursuivre en français, franco-ontarien de nature, donc il va y avoir des anglicismes. Bonne chance avec le transcript à la fin. Donc, ce que je vais dire pour commencer, je pense que c'est un bon début de demander aux gens de pseudo-identifier. Dans l'absence de données, dans l'absence d'informations, commencer avec une balise, une fondation importante sur notre main-d'œuvre. Ça nous donnerait un état global de la situation au sein d'une organisation, nous permettrait de prendre des décisions sur la mobilisation de talent, sur les investissements en apprentissage et en développement, et permet un certain matching préliminaire qu'on pourrait faire. Évidemment, un des risques importants qu'on voit beaucoup en ressources humaines, c'est la confiance du gestionnaire. Le gestionnaire doit avoir confiance au processus, au talent qui est référé. On voit souvent des tendances où un gestionnaire qui ne participe pas dans un processus est déjà réticent à l'idée d'aller piger dans un bassin de talent préexistant. Donc, on doit faire sûr ou s'assurer que le gestionnaire d'embauche a confiance dans le talent qui lui est fourni. Je pense que c'est important de considération. I'll switch to English for this one. I think there is a risk. It's important to put in place the GBA lens to some of those self-assessment. Some of the preliminary research that I've made indicates the possibility of differences with, in genders in assessing their level of skills. So for me, like for example, for male would have a tendency to rate themselves a bit higher than women. So these are all important considerations to keep in mind as we're trying to put in place a system. Yeah, that's what I have.
Super réponse, merci. Madame Crandall.
Thank you. So I agree 100% with Benoit in that I think at this stage of the game, in the absence of a common framework, in the absence of common tools to evaluate and measure skills, that what we require right now is the richness of the information and the data, and having it self-reported would be a really big starting point. And maybe to contextualize it from a different way, I have this vision where we have an ability to basically intake public service employees' CVs in a standardized format so that we can query it. And when you think about it from that perspective, it kind of showcases in my mind the absolute lack of information that we have accessible to us around our employees. So I've been an indeterminate public servant since 2006. And if we wanted to create a skills profile for me, and we had these magical robots that could go into 1 million different filing cabinets, these little robots would probably be able to find every CV I've ever submitted for every job I've done. They'd probably be able to find invoices for investments that the federal government has made in terms of my training and development. The robots would be able to find all sorts of information around my performance in terms of my PMA assessments and those other things. But those robots would then have to build a profile for me that could be accessible to the whole federal government. And even then there would still be a huge amount of information that about me and my skill set as an employee that would never be accessible that way. And an example that I like to give is that I am the president of my condo board where I live and have been for the last 8 years. And there's a skill set that I've developed doing that work around negotiations and all sorts of other things that I would not be able to draw the same lines to in my professional work. And when we ask for skills to be validated and assessed, and then maybe even signed off by management, we lose a lot of the ability to collect information about our employees and the public service in general that allow us to, as Julian said earlier, really maximize the use of our data sets. When we have the two data sets, that is the data set around people and the data set around work, when we have access to both of those and we can look at all the various ways that they align, that's when we position ourselves to actually be able to say, you know what, we can optimize best fit in the public service. We can really start looking at where do people belong? What is the work that we have coming down the pipe? What does our workforce look like? And that starts giving us that baseline data to figure out where do people fit? What do we need to do next? What skill sets do we need to recruit for? What do we need to develop in our workforce? Those kinds of things.
Excellent. I like the vision. Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
So yeah, I mean, surprisingly, I agree with everybody, which is, you know, not normally my way. So, you know, it's a good news story right off the bat. All kidding aside, though, I think, you know, the simple answer for me, and I look at it from a pragmatic perspective, is that we don't actually have the list of skills that people have identified yet. Not sure how we're going to even think about evaluating them. So I would suggest that the importance of evaluating them is quite high, but it's a sequencing of events. And once we have all that data and we actually know what people have identified as their skill sets, maybe that's when we start to think about, you know, how are we going to evaluate that? But first and foremost, I think it's just knowing people have certain skills is a good start. So, you know, the problem that you get into is if we reach too far ahead, we take away from the effort that's required to actually get together and collectively pull that set of skills together that we can inform a better tomorrow.
Those are great ending words. Thank you, sir. Madame Filiatrault.
Yeah, that was by accident, I think.
It was good accident. Thank you.
I would also agree with what all my colleagues here said. I think striking that balance between assessing and you know, self-identifying skills, we can do a better job. To what Benoit was saying, that confidence in the hiring manager and the assessment tools that were used to be able to reuse them, and also try and think of, like, I find we often default to yes, but I'm different, or yes, but, you know, I need to add this piece, and really start looking at how can we repurpose pools that already exist and having to maybe reduce that reassessment. To Natalie's point, I like the idea of this like portal where employees can put all those skills, and I would even like push that a little further in. If you put in some of the jobs that exist out there, have employees be able to see, okay, this is my current skill set, this is where I want to go, and then being able to show that delta on how can we, you know, further upskill, develop, or where do I want to bring my leadership competencies to be able to attain the goals I set for myself. I think it's really important for employees to see themselves long-term in the public service and not necessarily just in the role that they're in today.
100%. Thank you, because that is one of the great advantages of the federal public service is that we can navigate from one job to the other, bring our skills, gain more perspectives. It's beautiful. We're privileged. Merci beaucoup à tous. C'était très intéressant. Qu'est-ce qu'on pense de l'importance d'évaluer l'éducation formelle, la certification, les compétences et l'expérience versus le potentiel lors d'un processus d'embauche? Mr. Taylor.
Well, all right. So I think, you know, we tend to have this focus on one thing, and we say this is really important versus this is really important, and so let's put all our effort into this. And I think it's never that clear cut. And so hiring for potential, or hiring for experience, or hiring for skills is relevant under certain circumstances. And I think it's important to kind of consider that. And I recently was on Facebook or Twitter or one of those social media things where I was listening to somebody talk about the fact that they would hire skills over anything else every day of the week. And so in response to that, I'm just going to give you this quick analogy story that I like. And it's about a king that's looking for some pirate treasure, and he wants to build this treasure. And so he hires these 3 people to come and tell, you know, who's going to find this for me. So the first captain gets up and says, well, I've got the fastest boats in the world. We'll get there fastest and we'll get it all done. And the king says, well, that sounds pretty good. And then he asks the second guy, and the second guy goes, well, I don't have the fastest boats, but I got the best sailors, and we can navigate storms, and we'll get you whatever you want to go and get your treasure for you fastest. To which he said, that also sounds pretty good. And then he says to the third guy, what about you? And the third guy says, well, I don't have a boat. I'm going to need one. And I don't have any sailors. I'll need those too. And he says, well, why would I possibly hire you? And he says, because I've got the guy that's got the map. And so I think the point of that story is that in some cases, experience is more valuable. And I think what I'm trying to get at here is that there's no one is better than the other. It's totally dependent on the circumstances that we look at. And I think that's important to consider, not to put too much stress and emphasis on just one piece of information, but look at the suite of different information that we need in order to accomplish our tasks. And I think that's the part that's most important. Skills are a response to accomplishing tasks, not the end game. And I think that's the part that I was trying to get at.
Thank you, sir. Monsieur Castonguay?
Une réponse assez courte de ma part. Je pense que la question qu'on doit se poser, c'est à quel point est-ce que le facteur de l'éducation ou de la certification, dans ce cas-ci, mène à une performance élevée dans le poste. Donc, évidemment, je pense qu'on peut prétendre que c'est une certification, ça vient avec des compétences que tu as acquises, de la connaissance que tu as acquis, mais souvent, on va utiliser le concept de certification ou éducation comme étant une balise de point d'entrée dans un domaine particulier, sans vraiment avoir fait le lien entre comment est-ce que ta connaissance ou ta certification se met en valeur dans ton poste existant. Et j'aimerais mentionner que le focus continuel sur, disons, l'éducation post-secondaire, dans un cas notamment, peut continuer à mettre en place ou continuer à alimenter des écarts ou continuer de propager certaines barrières systémiques à l'embauche pour, dans notre but d'avoir une meilleure diversité et inclusion dans la fonction publique. Donc, juste mettre l'emphase sur ce prérequis-là, sans vraiment essayer de défricher qu'est-ce qu'on veut de cette certification-là, qu'est-ce qu'on a besoin d'y sortir qui est directement relié à la performance au travail. Je pense qu'il y a une meilleure analyse que de juste toujours dire oui, j'ai besoin de quelqu'un qui a une éducation formelle. Donc, ouais, c'est ça pour moi.
C'est excellent, merci. Je vois aussi dans le chat qu'il y a beaucoup de contributions qui valent peut-être la peine de soulever. Comment est-ce qu'on utilise un vocabulaire et des termes qui sont vraiment internes au gouvernement et que le reste de la population, que ce soit le secteur plus privé ou d'autres ONG, ne comprennent pas. C'est comme si on parlait un langage distinct. Et ça n'aide pas à la diversité, à l'inclusion. En fait, ça contribue à des barrières qui sont peut-être pas nécessaires. Même chose en termes d'équivalence. Comment est-ce qu'une expérience acquise à l'extérieur de notre fonction officielle peut être transférée et reconnue au sein de la fonction publique? C'est des questions valides à se poser. Madame Filiatrault, réaction?
Oui, je pense aussi qu'il y a comme un balance à faire entre c'est quoi qu'on recherche dans l'éducation. I also think we need to, can we strike a balance in bringing people with the formal education and maybe other types of experiences? And I think to build on what Benoit was saying is really building a team that's multidisciplinary and a little more, rounded from that perspective. I think also at ESDC, being able to serve clients and have employees that reflect the people that we are serving. So trying to be mindful of that. And I think it also comes down to, I know some classifications probably have different levels of entry from a formal education perspective, but also looking at how can we build those multidisciplinary teams and have, the org structures to support it to advance the work and bring those different perspectives.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Madam Crandall.
Well, the first thing I would ask is who am I hiring? Because if I'm hiring a heart surgeon, their educational credentials are going to be incredibly important. Given though that in general in my life, I'm not hiring heart surgeons very much. I think I agree with what basically what everyone's saying. What we really need to be thinking about is that there isn't one path or one way forward, right? To come back to some of the things that Benoit said actually in the previous question or the previous answer, like we have an enormous amount of talent and potential within the public service. We can't turn a blind eye to that. We don't map that. We don't have good ways of actually bringing that forward and understanding what that is. And I think that we also do need to have many situations in which, you know, formal accreditations, certifications, and education still have a huge part to play. I'll use the example of Natural Resource Canada, where we have quite a science-based mandate, and there are some positions within the department that absolutely require formal education and things like that, and those things are unlikely to change in the short future. I think one of the things, though, and coming back to something that was said in the chat, is I agree we need to unblur the lines. Like the line between government and private sector, government and non-government is very blurry, and we actually should be we should be doing things in a far more universal way. We shouldn't have our very own speak. It's important that we start thinking about what that gig economy means and how do we facilitate, you know, movement in and out of the public service in a different way. And in order to do that, we will need to standardize. We will need to start thinking about what are those universal languages that we're speaking around both people and work data.
Excellent point. Merci à tous. Merci pour contribution. I'm going to jump on Slido because there's a lot of activity there. Je vais essayer de le traduire aussi pour le chat. How does the Government of Canada remain current, or frankly, approach currency in the skills and data space, given a global context of gig economy realities, considerable mobility, and the need to better leverage and support transferability of skills? Question $1 million.
I was going to say, yeah, can someone write the answer to that one down?
I will copy in the chat for those of you who are more visual than auditive, et je vais aussi le traduire en français. Monsieur Castonguay, réaction?
Peut-être rapidement, je pense que au tout début, on a même de la misère à définir certaines de ces compétences-là dans notre système de classification actuel. Donc, on voit l'émergence de compétences clés comme donner, l'expérience digitale, et on a encore une réflexion interne d'essayer de figurer quelle classification, quel niveau, quelles sont les compétences. Donc, je pense que ça va être extrêmement difficile d'assurer que notre système de classification se tient at the cutting edge of the changes in emerging data skills or digital skills. I think we've seen some innovative approach to try to tackle this, from trying to get short-term external help within the government, move them around. So I think the concept of being able to increase mobility of those specific talents that are that we're lacking right now. I think the more systems we can put in place to have them move around and share that knowledge would be on the right path.
Merci, Monsieur Castonguay. Monsieur Taylor?
Well, you know, I may be somewhat biased in my response because I'm a data guy, but I think it really comes down to the provision of information and, you know, how much information do we have that's consumable and how is it all linked together in order for people to be able to make those decisions first and foremost. How do you find the right people to mobilize them? And as Nat said, the vast majority of what we're looking for is probably already within the government. The question is, can we identify it? And to sort of leap up a bit on Benoit's point, the system of classification as it exists today isn't designed to express clearly the work that you're doing. You know, it kind of comes back to a bit of what you were saying earlier, Jasmine, is that we need that common language construct that we can actually express in realistic terms to people inside and outside of the government of what we're doing. Being able to tell somebody that you're a GLWAL 13 for most people doesn't mean a whole lot. But if you can say that you are a supervisor of pipe fitting, that might change the game a little bit. So being able to speak in common terms, being able to connect the data, being able to identify what skills and competencies people have within those domains will probably make that entire thing considerably easier. But I will point out that we've just gone through this pandemic thing, or we're in the throes of this pandemic, and the ability for people to survive and mobilize and move around in this space has been somewhat tremendous. So I think, we shouldn't beat ourselves up so much that we can't look for advancements. I think we've done a pretty good job, but there's lots of room to grow, that's for sure.
Thank you, sir. Madame Filiatrault.
I think also looking at our processes can help support, a gig economy for employees that want to come in and out of the public service. Onboarding or staffing processes are still quite lengthy and an investment both for the hiring managers and the candidates. So having a look at those processes, I think, can also maybe support and attract that talent or people that we might just want for shorter stints, and then be able to have that mobility and employees. And I think also agree with, what have we learned from the pandemic? Mobility and maybe attracting talent that isn't in the NCR, or, that can work from anywhere in the country or even the world. I know at ESDC we have employees like that too, and making sure that we can learn from that and continue to, expand our pool of talent that we can draw from.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Let's get to it. Donc, toute blague à part, est-ce que vous pourriez nous donner des exemples concrets du travail que vous êtes en train, vous, votre unité, vous, dans le passé, vous êtes en train ou vous avez entamé par rapport aux habiletés et compétences? Parce qu'on nous demande dans Slido, what are you currently and concretely doing to show the example to employees and to other organizations? Like, are we actually walking the talk, or we're just like a bunch of like panelists and talking heads? Je vais y aller avec Madame Filiatrault.
So I can speak to a bit of the work that we're doing right now in the Benefits Delivery Modernization Program. We haven't implemented yet, but nonetheless, there's a lot of thinking, and we've brought a lot of stakeholders along. To give a bit of context, in operations in the programs here at ESDC, an employee that starts in person or then that takes the calls, their training curriculums are very different. Some are 12 weeks duration, some are longer, but even internally, how do we leverage the investment we've made in that training? Answering a call for a program and having that employee come in person for the exact same inquiries, sometimes we're creating that churn internally. So the first thing that we are looking at is how can we properly skills tag our employees and have that common view across the programs to then be able to, if there's alignment with the workload, is you have an employee that's been trained in the employment insurance program and we have, an influx of calls. Can we shift that employee to the call center on a given day or a given week? So we need tools to help us to support that. So a workforce management tool to really align the integration of workload and workforce. And that will help us being able to do the forecasting and even at least making sure that we're optimizing internally the workforce. So those are some of the pieces that we're talking about. We've learned a lot from the pandemic from that perspective. In very short periods of time, we've had to shift a significant workforce to where the demands are, especially with the EI program. So we are drawing from those lessons learned and seeing how we can further apply them in the Benefits Delivery Modernization Program.
Merci, Madame Filiatrault. Madame Crandall.
Thank you, Jasmine. So I guess I'll approach the question from two sides. So on one side, my personal history is that I have been working on a project called the HRBI, or the HR Business Intelligence Project, for some time. I will caveat this by saying it's a little bit of a personal obsession because most people don't manage to port their same project around from place to place. But it did start working at the Canada School of Public Service as a partnership between the Canada School of Public Service and Statistics Canada to basically pilot our ability to send a survey to employees to get an initial baseline skills profile for everybody, which included their top 15 skills as well as their level of mastery, all self-reported, of course, top 5 skills that they were interested in, certifications, accreditations, and some information about their work history outside of the federal government, as well as languages spoken other than our official languages for the federal government. And we were able to put all of this in Power BI and start looking at some information and some aggregate data on our workforce. Around the time that the pandemic started, we moved the Herbie project over to Okro for a skills inventory. And that project, I believe, is right now something that one day will be picked back up, maybe, as we get the capacity to move forward on some of those things. But right now, I have the absolute pleasure of being able to continue to experiment a little bit within the free agent program at Natural Resource Canada on what it means to have people data in a different way. And what does that mean in terms of how we go ahead and start looking at our human resources? So I feel like it's an optimal situation for me, because in the free agent program, our focus is really around the talents that the free agents have and the skills and competencies that they have, and how we're able to mobilize that to meet the needs of the federal public service. So it's really interesting for me to be able to start looking at how we look at people data in a different way. And in this case, when I say we're looking at people data, we're really looking at it agnostic from group and level around classification, and we layer that on later on in the process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madame Crandall. Monsieur Castonguay?
Donc, concrètement, il y a peut-être 3 choses que je pourrais mentionner. Le premier était à la réponse ministérielle, à la réponse COVID pour ESDE. On a essayé de mettre en place un système de mobilité de talent pour identifier le talent, le mobiliser et ensuite le réassigner. Et les systèmes manuels qu'on a dû mettre en place pour soutenir cet exercice-là étaient non soutenables. Avec des fichiers Excel, cet individu-là a été déplacé, qui d'autre qui est libre, quelles sont leurs compétences. Et on s'est vite aperçu que ce n'est pas un exercice qu'on peut faire assez facilement d'un côté d'un processus papier, disons. Donc, on explore des possibilités de voir qu'est-ce qu'un système pourrait avoir de l'air pour capturer nos compétences, nos aspirations de développement, qu'est-ce qu'on veut développer en fait de compétences, et essayer d'avoir un genre de système digital qui nous permettrait de faire le matchmaking un peu plus facile. Deuxièmement, relier la gestion de talent ou le processus de gestion de rendement à la gestion de talent. On fait tout exercice de gestion de rendement, on a ça à chaque année. Et quel est le lien entre cette conversation-là et la mobilisation de talent ou le développement de notre talent? Donc, essayer de faire le lien concret entre l'exercice de gestion de rendement et la mobilisation de notre talent au sein soit d'un secteur, soit de toute l'entreprise. On veut assigner un peu notre stratégie de gestion de talent, cherche à explorer certains il y a des placements de talent qu'on donne aux exécutifs comme Ready for Lateral, Ready for Advancement. Quelques critères, c'est comme un placement qui décrit un peu où tu en es dans ta carrière. Et on aimerait ça appliquer ça à l'ensemble de l'organisation pour ensuite, à chaque fois qu'on fait un exercice de gestion de rendement, on peut savoir qui est prêt pour une promotion, qui est prêt à bouger au niveau latéral et utiliser ça avec un lien direct en staffing. Et finalement, oui, exactement, le placement dans les boîtes. Et finalement, le programme d'agents libres, où est-ce que concrètement, on embauche des agents libres sur des attributs, sur des compétences individuelles et non sur des expériences. Donc, on veut innover dans ce modèle de recrutement-là, d'évaluer des caractéristiques individuelles, des attributs individuels et mettre ça en valeur au lieu de l'expérience, comme qu'on fait souvent au gouvernement.
Merveilleux, ça me semble hyper concret. Merci, M. Castonguay. Mr. Taylor.
All right, sorry, just having concerns with my mute button. It's just, one of those fun things where I got to put money in the mute jar every few days because I can't get it going. It's all good. It's one of those things where as a data guy, you would assume I'd know how to use technology, but It is what it is. Moving right along. So at Okra, we're looking at a couple of things, and one of the key things that we're looking at in this space is a project called the Job Architecture Project, and it basically is looking at how we categorize work in a slightly different way, utilizing existing fields that are already there, and it's based on the premise that we don't realistically understand the full scope of what our work is. Classification, not knocking it in any way, shape, or form, because it is actually a very, very solid structure. And as we start to combine it with the job architecture, you can see the power of the combination of that information actually starts to tell you more. But I'll start with the basic premise here of saying, if we don't know how many entomologists we have in the government, we don't know where they are, we don't know how many we're going to need, we don't know where to source them, this starts to set us up with some understanding of what we were talking about earlier around that common language construct of jobs and the categorization therein. How many IT people do we need? How many, communications folks do we need? What kind of work are they doing within the scope of their job families? So this is what that architecture project is looking at, and it's primarily on the job side of things, although it is the link into people to express the kind of work they are either doing today or what they've done in the past. And so that's something we're working on at the moment. There are a suite of other projects that are underway at Okra that potentially could impact in this space. But I'll leave it at that one for now, because I think that's the one that's most relevant to help out.
Super. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. I'm going to make a statement y'all can react to. The value of creating pipelines with educational institutions, given the rising availability of MOOCs, EDX, platforms that are now offering entire certifications for free. Google will even pay me to learn how to code. So what is the value now in terms of the federal public service deliberately going out to institutions and say, hey, can we create a viable pipeline to give new graduates access to federal public service jobs? Monsieur Castonguay, vous hochez de la tête. Allez-y.
Merci. Well, maybe as someone who's still paying his student debt, I still hope that my diploma is worth something. I do still the value. I see the value of building those partnerships. I think the educational institutions are still predominantly one of our biggest talent pools, and I don't think we should ignore it or focus elsewhere as long as we have that system in place or these institutions in place. One thing I'd like to add is that le lien entre les compétences et les connaissances développées dans un milieu académique et leur intégration dans un milieu de travail, je pense que c'est complètement logique qu'on essaye de faciliter le placement de notre talent du niveau académique et ensuite dans le milieu de travail. Je pense qu'il y a une lacune là. On s'aperçoit souvent que certaines compétences qui ressortent des universités ou des institutions n'ont pas vraiment un match parfait avec les besoins du milieu de travail. Mais je pense que tant que le nombre de talents, le nombre d'étudiants est aussi important, on ne peut pas se permettre d'ignorer ce talent-là. Je pense que, un peu comme j'ai mentionné plus tard, par exemple, de mettre l'emphase juste sur des institutions académiques peut lier à créer ou proliférer les embûches systémiques à la diversité et l'inclusion. Si on met toute notre emphase dans un système universitaire ou post-secondaire, je pense qu'on ignore une grande partie de la population qui pourrait amener des compétences et des connaissances importantes. Je pense qu'il faut trouver des manières de mieux mesurer les connaissances, les compétences qui sortent des MOOC ou des EDX, etc. Comme c'est là, on a vraiment de la misère à trouver c'est quoi l'équivalence, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire en termes concrets dans un milieu de travail. Mais je vais dire que pour le moment, l'emphase mise sur les académies ou les institutions académiques me semble raisonnable.
Excellent, merci. Merci de la sagesse, c'est super apprécié. Monsieur La Liberté? Vous voulez réagir à ce que M. Castonguay a dit?
Non, en fait, c'est une autre question que j'ai pour nos guests aujourd'hui, nos invités. On on a, comme Benoît l'a mentionné, on n'a à peu près aucune donnée empirique sur ce qui démontre quelles habiletés ont un impact sur la performance ou sur une embauche de qualité. On a à peu près rien là-dessus. D'autre part, avec le temps, on remarque que les gestionnaires ont de moins en moins la connaissance technique du travail qui doit être fait. On n'est plus à l'ère industrielle où le foreman était quelqu'un qui était sur la ligne de montage auparavant puis il a gravi les échelons. Aujourd'hui, plusieurs gestionnaires ne sont plus des experts de domaine, donc ils n'ont pas de base pour déterminer quelles sont les habiletés véritablement requises pour faire le travail. Et finalement, la durée de vie de certaines habiletés réduit constamment. J'ai lu quelque chose dans une étude, je pense, on estime que les habiletés deviennent désuètes à peu près environ 5 ans. Donc, il n'y a aucune façon que les descriptions de tâches peuvent être gardées à jour pour refléter les habiletés requises pour faire le travail. Donc, étant donné tout ça, je reviens à une question fondamentale qui est whose problem are we really trying to solve? For who are we trying to figure out or crack this problem, solve this problem of skills? For what purpose are we spending so much time on this? Secondly, what role can HR play in this challenge? And thirdly, what would you think might be a game changer in the public service to solve that problem? And I'm gonna propose one, but if we could only use all the data that we collect in staffing when we run a staffing process and reuse all that gigantic mountain of data for other purposes, such as identifying the skills that people have described in their resume, in the assessment, in all the simulation that we've administered, that could be a game changer. It would be a fantastic way to collect information that would be recent, relevant, useful for decision making. But I'd like to hear from you. What are your thoughts on what could be some of those game changers?
Je pense que ça va être facile vu qu'on a tous les mêmes systèmes et qu'ils se parlent tous. Mr. Taylor, you want to address that?
No, I'm just kidding, of course. I was going to say that's a big set of questions to ask. I was hoping they were going to pick on Benoit, but that's okay. We have an enormous amount of data, and I think, you know, if I address the first question, the question really is, I think if the question was, who's this for? Right? And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, if we get it right, it works for everybody. As an employer, you obviously need to find the right talent in order for us to accomplish the tasks. Those tasks are actually enabling Canadians to have a better life, a better existence. I mean, the intent is to serve Canadians. So I think, you know, the better we are in the government, the better we are providing our services, the better it is for Canada as a whole. But I also think that, you know, and I think it was Nathalie maybe that mentioned it earlier, we actually need to look at career progression. And I think that's where we start to open up the door around the work. How do we present that and how do we get that out to our employees? That actually helps them start to make plans and start to look at, you know, people similar to me had a similar career path. What do I need to improve on in order to advance my careers in the most effective manner? So I think ultimately, if we get it right, it works for everybody. In terms of the data that we have out there, a lot of the data out there that we have, and again, this is coming from my perspective, we're rich with data. It's just that it's not it's somewhat disconnected and it's not brought in together on a common framework that allows it to be well understood. And I think that's the part of what we're all kind of trying to work for.
Thank you, sir.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Maybe not. Maybe one out of the three. Mr. Laliberté does have huge questions. Madame Crandall, Madame Filiatrault, des réactions, des réponses.
So I guess I noted Etienne's first question really as being who it's for. So like Julian said, it's for everybody, but I'd like to flush that out specifically. I think employees need to have their data in their own hands in order to be able to advocate for themselves and manage their career and their career progression in a different way. That is not something as a public service employee. You have access to your immediate manager, you have access to mentors that you find, you have access to some HR advice. But in terms of guiding your career, we need to give employees and facilitate their people's autonomy and their ability to advocate for themselves and move their careers in the directions that they want to go in. I think managers desperately need to have access to some of this information and this data. It can be very, very difficult as a manager in the public service to fully understand, how do you do work planning? How do you do succession planning in the absence of a lot of the data and the tools that we need to succeed, to be able to understand what are the skill sets? You know, you have as a manager situations where you have an employee who brings something to your team, and if you look at their CV, that might only cover 70% of what it is that you need. If you're able to map that in a different way, you understand what are the skill sets that you're looking for. And sometimes the soft skills that people bring to a team are the ones that you most urgently need to replace. Which makes it a little bit complicated when you're not looking at skills data, because you then are forced into thinking about classifications, groups, and levels, as opposed to being able to understand that you can have skills at different levels within a multidisciplinary team, and allow managers to really think things through in a different way. I also think that, you know, this information becomes critically important for HR. Who are we trying to solve a problem for? HR overall. We need to, as an enterprise called the Government of Canada, we need to figure out how we can mobilize the skill sets that we have in a different way, how we can be more agile. The reality of the situation is we are currently in the process of meeting our future of work here in the public service. COVID-19, the pandemic, all sorts of things have accelerated some sides of this. And so we really need to approach what we do with intent in order to be able to meet that future. And I think one of the last really main groups is, like, the government as the employer needs to have access to data, even at an aggregate level, to understand what the needs of the workforce are, and understand, of course, what the work that we have coming down the pipe is.
Thank you, Madame Crandall. Est-ce que, Janie, tu avais quelque chose à ajouter?
I think I would just echo, you know, who are we trying to solve this problem for? I think it's Canadians and who we serve. Ultimately, data, I think, is also a big challenge in that. Having that view of the workforce, from my perspective, aligning it with the workload to make sure that we can meet the demands of clients coming to the department. Also looking at how do we measure performance. Right now, you know, we're very heavy on, you know, the turnaround time on some of our claims, but what about that channel churn and making sure that we can respond to clients maybe at the first point of contact? So having that view of the data, I think, would really help support and make more rounded performance metrics, and I think something that would help motivate employees in seeing the impact that their work has at the end of the day to who we're ultimately serving. So I'm not sure that answers fully the question, but just a few thoughts I had.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Castonguay, est-ce qu'on vous avait donné un tour?
Pas pour répondre à Étienne, mais peut-être juste ajouter que, évidemment, c'est pour tout le monde, les employés, les gestionnaires, l'organisation. Je suis complètement d'accord avec ça. J'aime aussi croire que c'est pour nous, les professionnels des ressources humaines. Je pense que le concept d'avoir accès à ces données-là, les manipuler, les interpréter, a vraiment la chance de transformer la perception des ressources humaines et le mandat des ressources humaines au sein du gouvernement, qui est aujourd'hui beaucoup centré sur des opérations, sur des demandes de dotation, mais amener cette perspective-là basée sur les données de notre talent peut changer la façon dont le rôle des ressources humaines est intégré dans nos organisations.
C'est vrai, on pourrait gérer de façon proactive la carrière des employés, surveiller un petit peu plus étroitement leurs besoins d'apprentissage, combiner les postes vacants avec les meilleurs candidats potentiels de façon plus efficace. Donc oui, absolument. J'ai hâte de voir qu'est-ce que ça peut donner. And we are 3 minutes out of the end of this event. And so I will stop here because I want us to be able to run to the washroom, frankly, if we have a meeting at 2. And so I think it's a good practice to end 5 to 5 and then to start our next meetings past 5. So thank you so much. Panelists, you have been wonderful. I think that for myself and also from comments for the audience, the conversation has been insightful, deeply appreciated. And we love that you were able to join us today. We look forward to more conversations around these because it's almost like we know what to do. We just now need to be able to do it. And we know what that means. So we'll have more conversations around that. Donc, merci. Merci aux participants. Vous avez été magnifiques. Vous avez aussi démontré qu'il y a un appétit pour avoir ce genre de conversation-là dans cet espace-là. Please don't forget that you can participate. We have these monthly. Don't forget to sign up to our GC Collab page. That's how you will know. The recordings will be available and all additional resources will be available on our GC Wiki shortly. Et on a hâte de vous revoir. Donc, faites attention à vous. Prenez soin de vous. Stay safe, everyone. We'll see you soon. Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.